Hello, everyone. My name is Samantha Hunter, and I work in the Policy Office at the National Science Foundation. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to the Spring 2021 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. I'm now pleased to present this session, which will cover the Directorate for Biological Sciences. This session will be presented by Dr. Phoebe Lostroh. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Phoebe Lostroh, and I'm joining you today to talk about the biological sciences at NSF. My talk today will be divided into three parts. I will talk about what kind of science we fund, how a scientist applies for NSF funding in bio, and funding for people at specific stages of their careers. First, what kind of science do we fund? The Directorate for Biological Sciences funds biology research about the very smallest of biologically active molecules, all kinds of organisms, and even the entire biosphere. And we think of ourselves as being divided into four different divisions, three of which correlate with size. So you can see that molecular and cellular biosciences is for the very smallest units of life. Integrative organismal systems focuses on organisms. Environmental biology focuses on organisms in their context and can even include projects as large as the entire biosphere. Meanwhile, the fourth division, biological infrastructure, funds infrastructure that supports all of these different kinds of biological research. We'll go from smallest to largest to talk about the different divisions. The molecular and cellular biosciences has four core programs. They're called cellular dynamics and function, genetic mechanisms, molecular biophysics, and systems and synthetic biology. We also have some special programs and tracks within molecular and cellular biosciences that are active this year. We have a solicitation called Transitions to Excellence in Molecular and Cellular Biosciences Research for mid-career faculty. We also have a solicitation calling for proposals about designing synthetic cells beyond the bounds of evolution. Another program is Semiconductor Synthetic Biology for information storage and retrieval. And finally, we have reproducible cells and organoids via directed differentiation and coding. This slide shows you some of the exciting science we fund in the molecular and cellular biosciences. You are looking at a picture of a bacterium called Geobacter. Geobacter makes these long appendages that come from its cell body and that have a really interesting property. They can actually conduct electricity, and you are looking at a picture of a very close-up view of these nanowires that can conduct electricity. And new technology based on these bacteria could actually provide us with a new source of renewable energy. We also have the division of integrative and organismal systems. Their core programs include behavioral systems, developmental systems, neural systems, physiological and structural systems, as well as plant genome research and enabling discovery through genomics. So what kinds of cool science are funded by integrative and organismal systems? Well, here's an example. You're looking at a squid that lives in the ocean. Until this funding was provided to the researchers and they accomplished this work, it was not very easy to genetically modify these squid. And now, thanks to an investment from the National Science Foundation, it's possible to genetically engineer these squids, which you can see in the picture by the following. On the left, you're looking at the control animal, and can you see that it has little spots all over it? So the researchers figured out a way to knock out one of the genes that's needed to make these spots. That gene happens to be called TDO. And so on the right, you are looking at a squid that has been genetically engineered, and you can see that most of the spots are missing. This squid is made up of a mix of cells where the TDO gene is missing from some of them and not from the others. And with this new genetic engineering technology, scientists will be able to study squids as they do more common laboratory subjects such as fruit flies and mice. And this breakthrough will help us understand how marine animals will respond to changing conditions in the world's oceans. Next up, we have the Division of Environmental Biology. Their core programs are divided into two, ecology and evolution. There are also many special programs and tracks in the Division of Environmental Biology. These include Bridging Ecology and Evolution, Dimensions of Biodiversity, Ecology and Evolution of Infectious Diseases, Long-Term Research in Environmental Biology, Long-Term Ecological Research, Macrosystems Biology and Neon-Enabled Science, and Opportunities for Promoting Understanding through Synthesis. Well, what's an example of science funded by the Division of Environmental Biology? Here you are looking at a map of the entire continental United States. And the reason this map was published is that the scientists the National Science Foundation funded were looking at a contradiction that is as old as Darwin. So Darwin had two contradictory ideas about the success of invasive species. And because of the continental scale observations that are funded by NSF, we have now discovered that relatedness to native species matters for the success of an invasive species at certain geographical scales and not at others, thus solving the paradox that Darwin himself had observed. Now, this information will actually help us control invasive species such as Japanese pine beetles in the Rocky Mountain West. Next, I'm going to tell you about the Division of Biological Infrastructure, which is divided into three parts. Their core programs include human resources, research resources, as well as biocenters, facilities, and additional research infrastructure. So the Division of Biological Infrastructure invests both in people and in tangible types of resources. Here's an example of research funded by the Division of Biological Infrastructure, which funds, for example, computational resources. And in this case, you are looking at a computational analysis of the SARS coronavirus 2 spike protein, it's the one in teal, and how it interacts with the mammalian ACE2 receptor, which is shown in beige. By using computers to analyze how these two proteins interact, we can predict whether the coronavirus will spill over from human beings into other animals, and whether any other zoonotic coronaviruses could emerge to infect people. Another very important and exciting network funded by NSF is the National Ecological Observatory Network, which consists of 20 regional observations all over the continental US, as well as Puerto Rico, Alaska, and Hawaii. This is a collection of 81 field sites that have been active in many cases for 30 years. Now, what happens at NEON sites is that certain kinds of data are collected on a regular basis, and anyone can then use those data to ask continental scale research questions that are not possible without being able to sample such a gigantic place as an entire continent. Additionally, the National Science Foundation Biosciences has priorities for financial year 2021. And these, of course, include emerging infectious diseases, but also life on a warming planet, biotechnology to advance the bioeconomy, integration across the biological sciences, and broadening participation. Sometimes we get asked questions about how biology relates to biomedical research. And in biosciences at NSF, we support fundamental research. In contrast, research with disease-related goals, such as work on the etiology, diagnosis, or treatment of physical or mental disease, abnormality, or malfunction in human beings or animals, is normally not supported. However, research in bioengineering with diagnosis or treatment-related goals that applies engineering principles to problems in biology and medicine while advancing engineering knowledge is eligible for support through engineering. Bioengineering research to aid persons with disabilities is also eligible. So if you work on basic science that's related to biomedical research, you might still be eligible for funding at the National Science Foundation. And in a few minutes, I'll tell you the advice we give everyone, including you. Please talk to a program officer to find out how your work might fit at the National Science Foundation. There are also funding opportunities for biological research outside bio. For example, there's funding for some biology research in engineering biology and health, in the physics of living systems, in the polar programs, which address both the Arctic and the Antarctic, in advanced biomanufacturing of therapeutic cells. There's biological oceanography, biological anthropology, the chemistry of life processes, and environmental engineering and sustainability. Again, if you have any questions about how your research interests might fit with the National Science Foundation, just ask me or another program officer. This brings us to the second part of my talk. How does a scientist apply for funding at NSF? Well, the first step is to identify possible programs that fit with your research. Of course, as I've been saying all along, discuss your idea with a program officer and we will help you find the right fit. You also need to understand the review process and the merit review criteria. There are two merit review criteria, the intellectual merit of the work and the broader impacts of the work. And requiring scientists to explain and explore the broader impacts of their work is one of the aspects of the National Science Foundation that makes us unique compared with other funding bodies such as the National Institutes of Health. You also need to review and adhere to submission guidelines in the solicitation. That's the description of the type of research we plan to award, and in the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, which we affectionately call the PAPG. So what's the process in a little bit more detail from the perspective of someone applying to the National Science Foundation? Well, this is from the perspective of the principal investigator, which is the word that we use for the scientist who is going to use the funding to do research. So this scientist gets an idea and she collects some preliminary results. When she has preliminary results, that could lead to research questions and a justification for addressing certain kinds of research. And this is a really good time to talk to a program officer to find out whether the research questions and the preliminary results are going in a certain direction that would allow the researcher to fit into a certain kind of biology program. So for instance, in molecular and cellular biosciences, should you be applying to cellular dynamics and functions, or should you be applying to genetic mechanisms? So after you talk to a program officer, you would submit that proposal. And then there's the merit review process, where a panel of your peers will apply the intellectual merits and broader impacts criteria to decide whether they recommend that your grant be funded. If your grant is funded, we call that an award. And of course, that's a happy day. We program officers love to call people and tell them that we've given them an award. But sometimes the proposal might be declined, which means that this time around, we're not going to give you the funds that you had requested. However, this is a perfect opportunity to talk to a program officer, because as excited as we are to talk with someone who got an award, we are also excited to talk to people who got a decline, because we're really invested in helping you do the best science that you possibly can. So we want to talk to you about what happened, and we want to help you move forward after a decline. The merit review process in the biological sciences begins with you submitting your proposal. Now, at this point in time, most of our solicitations have no deadlines or target dates, which means you can submit any time that is convenient for you. After that, there will be a combination of ad hoc reviews or panel reviews. An ad hoc review is someone who does not come to the National Science Foundation, but has the opportunity to read your proposal and give us their evaluation. Whereas a panel is, 6 to 10 or 6 to 20 people who are part of a discussion of your proposal, as well as dozens of other proposals. And they work to evaluate those proposals together and then recommend to the program directors which proposals they think should be funded. Ultimately, the program director, me, makes a recommendation to our leadership about which projects should be funded. And then that decision is justified and explained to our managers, and it moves up through the foundation that way. And some of this process varies across the National Science Foundation. So for instance, there are some cases where a proposal is reviewed exclusively by ad hoc reviews, and there are some cases where proposals are reviewed exclusively by people on a panel. So it just depends. The merit review criteria include the intellectual merit, which is the potential to advance knowledge, as well as the broader impacts, which is the potential to benefit society and to contribute to the achievement of specific desired societal outcomes. Now, one of those societal outcomes that we are trying to achieve is broadening participation in science. So here are some other examples. First of all, broader impacts could include teaching, training, and learning, such as including undergraduates and graduate students in the lab. Broadening participation of underrepresented groups, which means providing opportunities for people from underrepresented groups to engage in science and to advance their scientific careers. To build or enhance partnerships with other agencies or even internationally. Broad dissemination of that work to enhance scientific and technological understanding, and even to explain your findings to the general public. Enhancing infrastructure for research by investing in labs, equipment, and work even in other places, such as in developing countries, and also local impacts that could affect policies at the state and local levels. This brings us to the third and final part of my talk, which is about funding for people at specific career stages. The National Science Foundation invests in research experiences for undergraduates. We call them REUs. And these are experiences for undergraduates who are currently enrolled in 2 or 4-year colleges and are U.S. citizens. These provide opportunities for undergraduates to do summer research with a scientist who is funded by the National Science Foundation. There are mainly domestic programs, but there are a few international programs, and it's most typical to complete the REU over the summer. Now, how does a student find such an opportunity? Well, we maintain a list of REU sites on the National Science Foundation website. And so a student should go to that website and make a note of the programs to which they want to apply. And then they will apply directly to an REU through that institution's website rather than through the National Science Foundation. And anyone who wants to apply for an REU will need to write a personal statement, provide their transcripts, and provide 2 recommendations. We also invest in research in undergraduate institutions. This program is for faculty at primarily undergraduate institutions. And what it is an opportunity to support PUI faculty engagement in their professional field, to build capacity for research at their institution, and to support the integration of research and undergraduate education. This can happen at any U.S. institution that is defined as a primarily undergraduate institution, which means that the institution awarded fewer than 20 PhDs in the last 2 years. Again, there is no deadline for applying for an RUI, and you apply through the research.gov website. Anyone working at a primarily undergraduate institution should also investigate the Research Opportunity Award supplements. These provide supplements to PIs who already have funding to support somebody from a PUI coming to their institution and doing research at that collaborator's institution. Now, here are the programs that are linked to career stage. So we have the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. This is for graduate or undergraduate students who are about to pursue a master's degree or a PhD. You have to be a U.S. citizen, national, or permanent resident to be eligible. This is a 5-year fellowship that provides 3 years of financial support at any U.S. institution. Someone can apply for the GRFP as an undergraduate in their final years of study, as recent graduates who just finished their undergraduate degree, or as graduate students within the first 12 months of study. These applications do have a deadline, most typically in October or November of each year, and the deadlines are very clearly noted on the NSF websites. So how do you apply for the GRFP? You just go to the NSF website, FastLane, and it will explain how to go through the procedure and what documents you need to provide. After completing your PhD, you become eligible for postdoctoral research fellowship in biology. Again, this is for recent recipients of doctoral degrees who are U.S. citizens. This provides 2 years of postdoctoral fellowship funding, in one case 3 years, depending on the theme to which you apply. So right now we have 3 themes: the rules of life, plant genomics, and broadening participation. You will be completing this postdoctoral work at a U.S. or foreign institution, depending on your interests and needs. And again, there is an application deadline in this case, and it's sometime in the fall. You will apply through research.gov, and there is a webinar about the postdoctoral research fellowships that you can find through the Division of Biological Infrastructure website at the NSF pages. The next program I'm going to talk about is for early career faculty, and it's called the Faculty Early Career Development Program. Tenure-track faculty members at the assistant professor level or equivalent are eligible to apply. This is designed to help junior faculty members develop activities that can effectively integrate research and education within the context of his or her organization. This might be at any U.S. institution, and there is an application deadline in the summer every year. Once again, a PI would apply through the research.gov portal. We also have a mid-career advancement solicitation for faculty and scientists and engineers who are at the associate professor rank or equivalent. This is an opportunity to substantively enhance and advance their research program through synergistic and mutually beneficial mentor partnerships, typically at an institution other than their home institution. These can occur at any academic institution in the U.S. or nonprofit organization, and the deadline is typically in February, and it occurs once a year. Once again, you would apply for this funding through research.gov. As I draw my remarks to a close, I want to remind you that we also have other cross-cutting programs of interest to biologists. These include the Biology Integration Institutes, which support collaborative teams of researchers investigating topics that span multiple disciplines. The COPE program for coastlines and people, which supports investigations of coastal processes and hazards and their interplay with humans. The NNA, or Navigating the New Arctic program, which is convergence research to address the interactions or connections among natural and built environments and social systems in the Arctic. And last but not least, since I'm a microbiologist, there's the SIT-S program for Signals in the Soil. Now, this is a multi-agency program to transform our understanding of the soils. And the last thing I want to tell you before I take your questions is that NSF needs you. We love serving the American public and having the opportunity to invest tax dollars in the best science in the world. And we certainly hope that you will reach out and talk to us when you have questions. So with that, I am going to stop and take some questions. Thank you so much for your attention. The last slide will show you my contact information in case you need to talk with the program officer. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Phoebe. Let's go ahead and jump in with questions. And if you have more questions, just feel free to submit them in the Q&A and we'll get this interactive session going. Okay, so let's start with, is there a timeline for how frequently these bioscience priorities change or turn over?
Well, in my experience, the priorities change about every 2 or 3 years, but it might be shorter or it might be longer. It's flexible. There's no set amount of time that we stick with one of the priorities or another.
Okay. More for you? All for you, actually.
Okay, all for me. Okay.
Yes. Are REU proposals reviewed via panel, ad hoc, or both?
So in the Division of Molecular and Cellular Biosciences, we do both. And I think that's pretty typical, would be for both a panel and some ad hoc reviews, but that might not be the case in every single program in every division or directorate.
And how is the proposal classification form being handled in research.gov? We've submitted a few bio proposals via research.gov that would normally require this form, but there was nowhere to upload the form as usually there is in Fastlane.
Well, thank you very much for this question. I think people are often surprised to learn that program officers aren't actually trained in using Fastlane and research.gov. So we would simply advise you to please contact the help desk or the help phone line or the help email through research.gov, and I'm sure they'll help you out with that. Thanks for the question.
Okay. Let's see. I'm interested in biological infrastructure, but need to read about the program solicitations to learn which program may be best for me to submit to. Can you give me a brief explanation to how I would browse program requirement priorities?
Absolutely. So what I would recommend is that you use a browser and search for nsf.gov DBI, Division of Biological Infrastructure, and that'll take you right to the home pages for DBI. And then you'll be able to see a quick overview of the programs that they fund. And I would just click on one of those programs and contact a program director who is working in one of those areas that seems like it might be a fit. And if that's the wrong fit, it's okay. The program director will advise you on who else to talk with.
Okay, another one. For primarily undergraduate institutions who want to broaden their research, does funding support buying instruments or other infrastructure costs or hiring lab personnel?
Thanks for that question. I'm a big fan of PUIs because I work at one when I'm not rotating at the National Science Foundation. And yes, absolutely. An RUI could fund support for instruments and other infrastructure costs or hiring lab personnel. It's really all about whatever you need to be able to do the best science that you can do at your institution.
Okay. Can researchers from non-academic institutions apply for any of these programs?
You know, that is a great question. And I know from experience that I've seen applications from people who are at research institutions that aren't universities or colleges. So I think that it must be possible, but there could be program-specific requirements. So you should read the solicitation to ascertain whether or not you are eligible. And again, if it's confusing for any reason, just contact the program director.
That's exactly right. I was going to say the same thing. Unless the solicitation states otherwise, that's exactly right. Okay. Which funding mechanisms are most responsive to collaborations between biology and disciplines outside of the hard sciences? Does the lead PI need to be a biologist?
Oh, very interesting. So I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the hard sciences as opposed to the easy ones or the soft ones. But I will say that in general, we are very much in favor of collaborative research across disciplinary boundaries because that kind of research can be very creative and transformative for both disciplines. So again, I would ask you to look into the more specific program that interests you and the solicitation, and then go ahead and contact a program director to find the specific opportunities for collaboration that are available to you and that fit your research needs.
Okay. Will there be a new Signals in the Soil solicitation released in 2021?
Oh, that's a great question. And I do not know the answer. So I would have to look that up online myself, but I'm sure that information is, I'm sure that there's information on the solicitation. And if it seems like the solicitation is going to end because there's a deadline, there's a date that doesn't make sense, again, I'm a broken record. Ask the program director.
There's another question on signals in the soil. Is the funding relatively new? What has been the award rate? Do we have something like that set yet for SITs? And what generally are reviewers looking for in a compelling fundable SITs application?
Yeah, those are all wonderful questions. So I will say that what the panelists and reviewers are looking for is excellence in intellectual merits and excellence in broader impacts. How you achieve that is obviously up to you and your specific circumstance. Regarding the length of the program and the kinds of science that it funds, I am not as familiar with that program as I am some of the other programs because molecular and cellular biosciences is not often a participant in that, but I'd be glad to talk to you separately sometime and we can look it up together and see what we can find.
Sounds good. Okay, what is the best way for an early career researcher to express interest in acting as an ad hoc reviewer?
Oh, that's a great question. So we often get emails from investigators providing us with your CV and asking to serve as an ad hoc reviewer. So please do. Thank you. Thank you very much for your service.
Okay, and are bio proposals only accepted from biologists who are institutionally trained? Does it matter if the research and evidence are proofed?
Interesting question. I think that we do fund proposals in biology that have people like physicists and chemists who are PIs on the proposals. And I'm not exactly sure what the second part of your question is about. I would need a clarification to answer it.
Okay, so if you don't mind, maybe you can write in another, to explain what the second part means, and we will read that one as well. Okay, for proposals for core programs, which have less specific requirements than program solicitations, how can we know what aspects to address to make our proposal competitive?
Well, I think that there are several ways forward. So when you are considering applying to the NSF, and it might be your first time or you haven't applied for a long time, one thing you can do is visit the website for the solicitation for the program that sponsors the solicitation that you're talking about. And if you scroll to the bottom, there's always a link on awards that are made recently through that program. And so I think that can really give you, by reading those titles and abstracts, that can give you a pretty clear sense of the kinds of priorities for that program. It's also pretty common for people to summarize their research in 1 or 2 pages and send that to a single program director and ask the program director for an appointment to discuss their science and see if there's a fit. And so those are the things that I would advise.
Okay. We have more interest in serving as a reviewer, which is always great. Can postdocs serve as panel reviewers?
That's a great question. In my experience, I haven't seen any postdocs on any of the panels that I have worked with, but I don't know that it's necessarily forbidden. I know that postdocs who have a PhD obviously can serve as ad hoc reviewers.
Okay. Regarding the data form, we've contacted the help desk about this in the past, and we've been told to move it to Fastlane, which then causes us to miss deadline. Does this mean if there's a data form, it can only go through Fastlane?
Oh boy, that's a hard question, and I don't know the answer. I would have to ask the Fastlane helpline or the research.gov line myself. I'm sorry that you went through that, but good luck. Keep persisting. We would like to get your proposal.
I would say contact also just the NSF IT help instead of going specifically to Fastlane or research.gov, and then tell them what the issue is and to see if they're telling you it really can only be done one way. Because I don't. Yeah,
they're great. The folks on that helpline are great. You're right, Samantha.
Yes, so that should help us. Let's see here. Let's keep these questions coming. Okay, for interdisciplinary research, what recommendation do you have for helping PIs to determine which director is the best fit? For example, bio or geo, which directorate? How do you help me determine that?
Oh, well, that's a great question too. So you might have met a program director at a scientific meeting or something like that, and that helped helped you arrive on your interdisciplinary idea, which is half in biology and half in geology. So you can just ask that program director where they think you should submit. But the good news is, if you think you're a better fit for bio and NSF thinks, oh, you should have applied to geo, it's okay. We can fix that on our end after your application is received. So in that case, we might contact you. Well, we would contact you before we we made any changes. And we would say, we think this is a better fit for geosciences. And so we are going to recommend that this proposal be reviewed primarily through geosciences, but in collaboration with bio. So we would communicate with you about that and get your permission before we changed where the grant application was submitted.
Okay. Within bio, are faculty who have not received funding before prioritized over faculty who have established funding?
So we don't have any procedure by which we prioritize either new faculty or ancient faculty like me. Instead, we judge every proposal on its individual merits, and then we do track what proportion of new PIs that we fund, because we want to make sure that we are being fair in distributing the funding to people who are new, to people who are mid-career, and to people who are late careers. So I wouldn't say that we take that criterion into account when we are making most funding decisions, but we do take it into account to evaluate our program and try to make sure that we are being as fair as possible with your tax dollars.
Okay. If a deadline is on an ongoing basis, what is the actual cutoff to have a proposal being reviewed for the present fiscal year?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so there is no actual cutoff. It doesn't work that way. For example, in genetic mechanisms, we wait until we have a minimum of 30 proposals, and then we start to assemble a panel. And I don't always know how long that's going to take. So we can't predict when our panels will be. As far as the financial year goes, I think it would be useful to get your proposal in either in the fall or the early spring if you want to make sure that it's reviewed before the end of that particular fiscal year.
Okay. Can you give us any details about how competitive core programs are versus solicitations that have set deadlines?
Oh, great question. I don't have memorized all the different percent success rates across the foundation, but I think that generally we're looking at 25 to 30% success rates at this point, irrespective of whether it's a core solicitation or a special program.
Okay. Who are the program managers to contact for SIN bio-related research to check whether the research fits within bio?
Oh, great question. So I would recommend my colleague, David Rockcliffe, drockcliffe@nsf.gov.
Okay. I'm going to also ask some questions. We had a few come in early, so I'm going to ask some of those as well. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's see. The EDGE program recently went from open submission to a defined submission deadline. This was quite unexpected to me because I thought the opposite trend was underway, meaning that we were leaning more towards the open. So they want to know just why, is there any information you can provide as to why we switched in that direction?
Absolutely. So I contacted a friend who is in that program to ask them, and here's the answer. The program is now a collaboration between NSF and NIH, and NIH asked us to have a deadline because that works better for them. And we felt that the benefits of collaborating with NIH in this way outweigh the costs of having to have a deadline for our community. So we apologize that this change happened so precipitously, but we hope you are still interested in applying to the EDGE program.
You. And is NSF thinking of launching proposal solicitations from artificial intelligence? If so, could you elaborate on this program in the context of biological sciences?
Great. Well, I can't elaborate on a program that doesn't exist yet, so I can't help you there, but I know that artificial intelligence is a big priority foundation-wide, and if there's a biologist who can connect their work to using artificial intelligence to, say, model a complicated network, we would absolutely welcome that. It would fit well with the foundation's priorities.
Okay. I'm a laboratory coordinator for teaching and research labs, and I'm very interested in finding grants to support the purchase and maintenance of laboratory equipment, as well as grants to introduce resources such as department apiary, a pollinator garden, or a water feature. Can you recommend programs that I should be looking at?
Now, first of all, I want to be in your department with the apiary and the garden for sure. I think you need to look in the EHR, Human Resources and Education and Human Resources, and look for their programs such as IUSE, IUSE, which are specifically for funding equipment and other activities in the service of teaching. So I would start with the EHR for that question.
Okay. What general advice do you have for primarily undergraduate minority serving institutions to be competitive with R1 institutions for research awards? Are there any specific funding opportunities that PUI research institutions should pay special attention to?
Oh, great question. So we do have that RUI solicitation that I mentioned. If you are at a minority serving institution that's also an HBCU, we have several individual proposal, several specific solicitations for faculty at HBCUs. So again, you could look that up on our websites. And so in general, my experience as a PI at a primarily undergraduate institution is that sometimes we can constrict our science too much and sort of write a proposal that is constantly apologizing for the fact that we're going to have undergraduates doing the work instead of postdocs or what have you. And so my advice is that to be competitive, you need to have a big, beautiful research question that everyone agrees is a fascinating question, and then find your small part of it that can hook in and be done in your institutional context. And you don't need to apologize for your institutional context. We're excited that you're a scientist at a PUI or a scientist at a minority serving institution. Yay! Thank you for being part of the science workforce. And if you want to be competitive with R1s, you can be competitive with R1s. We often review RUIs and other proposals in the exact same panels, but we do take into account that we know for a PUI that it's going to be novice scientists who are collecting those data. So we do take that into account, and I think that I really strongly encourage people at PUIs to give it a try and apply for an RUI.
Okay, so we have a follow-up to the question. We didn't understand the second part, so the question overall, the initial one, are biological proposals only accepted from biologists who are institutionally trained. And the second part was, does it matter if the research and evidence are proved? So the follow-up is, what I mean by the second portion is, if the research is structured and if the discoveries have evidence to back claim, does it matter if you are an institutionally trained scientist? Is funding still available for independent discoverers?
Oh, what a great question. Independent discoverers. Citizen science is having such a renaissance right now. So you're making me think of all of those programs. As far as applying for funding from the National Science Foundation, I think there are eligibility criteria, which might include, for at least some solicitations, that you hold a PhD or equivalent. So I would look at the solicitation that most interests you and see what the eligibility requirements are.
Okay. And I will ask you all to keep these questions coming in, please. We really appreciate all the, as much as we can help you out. So this is great. This is why we're here. Yes. So
absolutely.
Okay. Are there any interactions or partnerships with NASA in seemingly overlapping research areas, such as astrophysics or geochemistry?
Yeah, there's definitely overlaps with those topics, especially in bio. We fund like research on extremophiles, for example. I cannot think of any joint programs between NASA and NSF off the top of my head related directly to biology, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. The NSF is a very large organization. So if you want to shoot me an email after this is over and remind me, we can do some website exploration together and see what we come up with.
Okay. Now, I don't know how this one will go. Okay, can you provide insights on USDA-related research topics, just like you did for NIH-related research? USDA mostly funds application-related research, not basic research.
Okay, we love plants, so I'll just put that out there. And so, we have a lot of PIs at the NSF who sometimes apply to USDA and sometimes apply to us. It depends on the nature of the question. If the question is really about basic science, especially even if it is related to an agricultural plant or agricultural creature, then that can go to the NSF. Whereas the more applied research on a specific, crop plant adjusting to drought or something like that, that's probably more appropriate for the USDA. But I don't often handle many plant proposals myself because I am a microbiologist. And so my recommendation would be that you look into contacting a program director, perhaps someone in integrative organismal systems, to ask about where your research fits at the National Science Foundation.
Is it too late in the summer, in quotes, to apply for early career mechanism you mentioned?
It absolutely is not. The early career program, I think the deadline is in later July, but I could be wrong about that. So I'd have to look it up. But I know that it's not in June. It's later than that in the summer. And we certainly hope you will apply.
Okay. Is there any way to appeal, rectify, or address minor issues when excellent proposals are rejected for trivial reasons?
It sounds to me like the best thing to do is to call the program officer who's managing your decline and to ask for a conversation, and they'll set up either a Zoom or a telephone call to talk to you about that. That sounds like a very specific circumstance that you would need to talk to someone about.
Yes. Okay. If after applying to a directorate program, the program officer thinks it doesn't, oh, we did that one. No, it doesn't fit their program, would the program officer send it to a different program, or would the proposal be declined? We had something similar, but no. So now they're asking, if it's submitted to one, would it be automatically declined, or might NSF move it around?
We wouldn't automatically decline it if we thought it could fit somewhere else. We would contact you and contact other people at the foundation to find a better fit for you. Proposals can be returned without review if they don't meet the solicitation requirements, so you should read those very carefully before you submit.
Okay. You had mentioned that part of the process would be to obtain preliminary results before submitting a proposal. However, what if we're applying for funding to obtain the equipment needed in order to obtain any results? Will this be a problem?
Yeah, it's a perennial issue, isn't it? I think what you would want to do is demonstrate feasibility in that you have used this instrument or equipment somewhere else and that you definitely have the expertise to use it. So that might be in collaboration with another institution, or that might be from a previous institution that you were at when you were a postdoc or something like that. So I understand it's the chicken or the egg. You need data to show the rationale for your experiments and feasibility, and yet sometimes you can't collect those data until you have the equipment. So we do have some empathy for that situation. The best way forward is, I know you're going to just be amazed that I say this, to talk to a program director who specifically can talk to you about the specifics of your situation.
Yes. Okay. I'm interested in the postdoctoral research fellowship in biology. I am a U.S. citizen, but would like to conduct research at a foreign institution, say in Australia. Would I need a U.S. collaborator at a U.S. institution to apply for the fellowship? Or would me being a U.S. citizen be sufficient while my collaborators are Australians and their research will be conducted in Australia?
That's a great question. And I would have to go to the DBI website and read the PRFB solicitation in order to find the answer. So my suggestion would be that you ask one of the program directors who are already in DBI.
Yes. Okay. Could you speak about the criteria that you look for in a good eager or rapid grant?
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, we funded a lot of rapids and eagers because of the coronavirus pandemic. So we are looking for exciting science that is edgy and that might not turn out, but if it turns out, it will be transformative and super exciting. So we're looking for that. We're looking for excellence in the intellectual merits and excellence in the broader impacts, just like for everything else. In the case of a rapid, we are also looking for grant applications that address an urgent situation going on, such as a flood or a pandemic. For instance, someone might write a rapid if there is some kind of hurricane and they need to go down to Louisiana and collect those data right then, because the data won't be there. And so, the circumstance will have changed in 6 months. So they need funding right away to go collect those data. So that would be an example of a rapid.
Okay, thank you. As a PD and based on your interactions with PIs, can you give any insight to the length of time for proposal preparation that you've seen for those that were successful?
I think it would depend on whether you are working full time on that proposal or whether you are doing it as part of other aspects of your job. So that's pretty idiosyncratic and individualized. I would say that the first time you submit a project, it probably takes quite a few months to prepare that and get it ready. But then if you do get declined the first time, which is pretty common, I'll be honest with you, then doing the revision, I think, would take less time.
Okay, so for biological proposals where co-review may be necessary, where should a PI start? Should we talk with one program officer first and then determine from there if it may fit with another program in tandem? And, so that we know we've discussed this, already, but this is also coming from a different angle. So
I understand. Well, I'm a biologist, so I say start with bio and see where it goes from there. We have good connections with other directorates at the foundation.
Okay. Can you give some examples of excellent broader impact activities that you've seen recently in awarded proposals?
So I can think about some of those. So we have, for instance, a program where the funded PI is going to collaborate with a local community college, and community college students are going to have the opportunity to collaborate in that research over the summer with basically paid internships for stipends for the participants from the community college. And so that relates to broadening participation and the STEM workforce. Other examples include working with a museum to develop an exhibit about the science at issue, or it could even be things like creating a series of podcasts and then trying to share those with a larger sort of general public audience rather than focusing on academia. There are many ways to be successful. And if you go to our awards abstracts search I think it's called the NSF Simple Search. You can search for just awards that are related to something that you like, and you can read about the broader impacts activities in those award abstracts that we put on our website.
Okay. I tried to talk to an advisor in the Directorate about a research idea, and I felt like I was blocked. Would it have been acceptable to talk to another person, another advisor within the Directorate?
Yeah, so I don't know exactly what happened, but absolutely, you can talk to someone else at the foundation. Please do.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions for specific programs that will be a good fit for environmental toxicology research?
I think I would start with the Division of Environmental Biology and contact one of the program directors who is in DEB.
Okay. Can you talk about the dynamics of integrated socio-environmental systems program?
I can't, but you made me want to go read about it right now. So I would have to learn about that to be able to have a conversation with you about it. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, let's see. Do you support microbiome research?
We support a lot of microbiome research. In molecular and cellular biosciences, it most often goes to SSB, which is Systems and Synthetic Biology. But we also just had a Rules of Life competition about microbiomes specifically. And I think that funding for microbiomes is going to continue to be a foundation priority for some time.
Let's see. Phoebe, anything you want to add about, any tips you have for, preparing a successful proposal as I keep scrolling?
Well, I would say that we have virtual office hours in all of the divisions in biology where we give talks and entertain questions from the community about a variety of topics, including how to write a really great proposal. And so I would go to the websites for the website for the division that most connects with you, Integrative Organismal Systems, MCB, Environmental Biology, or DBI. And I would look for their virtual office hours, because every time we do a virtual office hour, we post a PowerPoint that goes with that virtual office hour. And I know for sure in MCB, we have a virtual office hour recently that talks about how to prepare an excellent proposal. And I'm sure that's the case in the other divisions as well. So use our blog and our virtual office hours for questions like that.
Excellent. Is working at a non-academic institution, for example, a nonprofit, an acceptable reason to ask for more than 20% of salary?
Great question. It would depend on your individual circumstance, and it might be. You would need to talk to that specific program officer.
And you also would just justify why you need the salary. Whatever the amount is you need, that's what you put in your budget justification. You request what you need and you justify why you are requesting that. So you probably would have to expand a bit on, I work at a nonprofit, but you still are explaining why you need it. So in the budget justification, you just flesh out the reason behind it. So there's not a hard and fast no or yes. It's just depends on what's in that budget, how you justify, the request. Can you explain what happens after an award is recommended for funding? What are the steps that follow, and how long does the process take?
What a great question. So when an award is recommended for funding, there's actually several stages of that recommendation. So the program officer will make the recommendation, and then our leadership and our colleagues will, make sure that we have justified that recommendation properly. And then after a bunch of administrative work to make sure that the budget is fine and that all is ready to move forward, then the proposal will be reviewed by the Division of Grants and Agreements, and they will ultimately decide on making the award.
And also in the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide that Phoebe referred to earlier as the PAP Guide, there is an exhibit, I believe it's in chapter 3, but there's an exhibit that lays out the timeline, the proposal and award process timeline. So that will back up everything Phoebe just described. You could just see that written out for you.
Thank you. And I will say that in the absence of deadlines, we don't always know when the panels are going to be. So if you happen to submit your proposal, the day after we just had a panel, your proposal might wait a longer period of time for the review, like maybe even as long as 6 months. But otherwise, I would say we tend to get things reviewed within 3 to 6 months of submitting.
What is the etiquette for asking your program director for help in structuring a good proposal? Is the main purpose for a program director to only answer questions?
Well, I wish that were the main purpose of a program director, because I'm good at that part of the job. So the main purpose of a program director is to shepherd the merit review process and make sure that every single proposal gets a fair and thoughtful review in order to evaluate its intellectual merits and its broader impacts merits. And that certainly involves a lot of talking to people. But I'll tell you what, we read a lot all day long. We read proposals and references that are related to proposals. We write what are called review analyses to justify our recommendations. And then we also work with other program directors and other kinds of staff to develop policy, such as new solicitations that will help science move forward. The etiquette for asking the program director for help is just to ask, but I will say, please don't send separate emails to 6 program directors all in the same division. Instead, just pick one. And if he, she, or they cannot answer your question, then they will pass that on to someone else, and then just ask for a phone conversation.
Okay. What is the best place for a first grant for a new or recent hire assistant professor in the bioinformatics genetics intersection at an HBCU?
That's great. So depending on the HBCU that you are part of, you might want to look into it doesn't matter which HBCU you're a part of. There are 2 specific solicitations that are exclusively for faculty who are appointed at HBCUs. There's one called the HBCU UP program, which is through Education and Human Resources. And there's another one called the HBCU Excellence in Research, and that's through all of the directorates. And so my advice would be to look into the HBCU EIR program first of all, and then otherwise you could apply to any of the programs for which you are eligible. There's no exclusion of people who are from minority serving institutions.
Exactly. Yes. How do we decide? I don't know if you can do this, but how do we decide whether to submit to NIH or NSF?
Oh, it's always a hard question, especially in molecular and cellular biosciences. So I feel your pain. How you decide is you need to frame your intellectual merit and broader impacts into a 1-page description and send that to the relevant program director at NSF and ask for a phone conversation about whether or not it's too biomedical.
Okay. Can you comment on the NSF NIH joint solicitations and specifically the review process? We think we should expect NSF reviewers and review criteria, and NIH will sponsor those recommended.
Okay, so I can only speak to the EDGE program because that's the only such program that I have direct knowledge of, and that will be reviewed using the NSF reviewers and NSF review criteria.
Okay. See, we have time for just a couple more, probably.
This is a live audience, I'll tell you.
I know, I'm loving it, yes.
I see a new one for any opportunities for associate professors who have identified. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Any opportunities for associate professors who have identified gaps in knowledge and need additional training?
Yes, what a great question. And so the mid-career solicitation, the mid-career advancement solicitation is exactly for you. And then in the molecular and cellular biosciences specifically, if that suits your research, we also have a solicitation called Transitions to Excellence, which also suits that it's for that exact purpose. You are perfect for it.
Excellent. Can program officers tell potential PIs when the next panel will sit so the PI can get ideas of when to submit to make a proposal review cycle?
Yeah, we're pretty strict about confidentiality. And if we were to reveal that information, it's possible that could compromise the confidentiality of the panel. So we can't tell you that. But I will say that career solicitation for new investigators is always due at a single time. And so if you should happen to submit your proposal at the same time as they are submitting their proposals, your proposal is likely to get reviewed on the similar schedule that we will be using to review the career proposals.
Okay, I think maybe one more. Do you think healthcare researchers, such as physician or pharmacist researchers, if their research fits in at NSF?
I think it absolutely can fit in at NSF. And so, for instance, for the coronavirus rapids that we funded, many people who were the PIs on those proposals were PharmDs or MDs in addition to funding PhDs. Also, I want to say that it is fine to fund, NSF can fund biomedical research, just not in bio, but maybe you have an idea that would work for engineering or computer science or geo. Geo and health, like that would be super creative. I'd like to see a proposal about that because I'm sure that there are connections between geology and health. So I would look into the other divisions and or talk to look into the other directorates and then talk to a program director in bio to see what the opportunities are for you.
Just one more, I guess. Are bio career proposals reviewed separately and all together, or are they evaluated in panels along with other proposals?
So in the specific case of molecular and cellular biosciences, they are evaluated in panels along with other proposals, but we tend to group them together so that we do the 30 or 40 careers all at once, and then we do the other proposals. I'm not sure if that is the same in every single division. So I think that the answer to that question could vary. And if that's our last question, can I just say thank you to everybody? I just have so enjoyed talking to you. Have a great day, and thanks for your interest in the NSF.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. We'd greatly appreciate if you would complete our survey so we can get your feedback. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day and the weekend.